Hey everybody, welcome to episode 102 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back. Welcome aboard. I have been struggling to record this intro for a couple of days now. Usually it's pretty easy to just sit down and record these, and it hasn't been difficult because we don't have a good show ahead of us. We've got Emily McCarthy. She's a great person. She's doing great things, but it is a messed up United States out there. And if you are not upset or furious right now, I can't imagine you're paying attention. I try to leave politics out of this show. I try not to get into these discussions. I like to think that even though this show can only have the smallest impact on everything, that it's sincerely really about bringing people together and helping people find common interest and helping unite everybody. And this country is so divided and it is so infuriating, and I've just been so upset and just shaking with anger that it has been hard to focus on other things and get this intro recorded. And I thought about it, and I want to apologize to Emily ahead of time for including this in her episode. This should focus on her, but I also feel like it would be so irresponsible to not comment on what's going on around us. I just want to encourage all of you. I don't want to get into politics right now. I don't want to talk about all of the things I could talk about and all of the things that are infuriating, but I want to encourage all of you, just please stop and listen to each other and think for 1 second about the experience of a person that is different from you and has had a life different than you can imagine, and just try for the sake of everyone to think about that for a second and consider how people must feel right now after decades and decades of this. Think about that. And then think about how to heal people and help people and stop arguing with each other and try to move forward, because we aren't going to last much longer if we just keep dividing ourselves and keep fighting each other like this. So once again, I apologize to Emily, but I just had to get this off my chest. And if people are going to listen to this, I just want them to take a moment to think about that. And so I'm really going to try now to segue us into our show, because we do have a great show today. And oddly enough, some of the topics that are going on right now get discussed a bit in this episode. But we do have a really good show. It's with Emily McCarthy. She is a runner. She's former CIA. She was an overseas volunteer, and she's the head of the women's division at GORUCK. And if you haven't heard of them, they're a group that's composed of veterans and civilians, and they come together and they get active together and they build communities together. And if there's ever been a time that we need that, we need it right now. So I'm not going to make you listen to me rant anymore, and I hope everybody's still interested in listening to this episode. Emily and I spoke over Skype a few months ago, and we talked about all kinds of things, all sorts of stuff, from GORUCK itself to her international experiences to her life in the CIA to class disparities across the world, and even lighter-hearted, enjoyable fare like Red Rover. Come with me now, and let's go talk to Emily McCarthy.
My name is Emily McCarthy. I'm born and raised in Florida, and that's where I live now, and that's where my husband and I have moved our headquarters for the past several years for GORUCK. GORUCK is something that we dreamed up together when I was posted to West Africa when I was working for the CIA. You know, being on this podcast is a real treat. We spend a lot of time outdoors, and sometimes it's in a conventional way, and I think other ways is not as conventional. I think a lot of people have forgotten what it's like to be outdoors, and when they live in a city and get older and entrenched in their careers and their ways. So Jason and I think a lot about what it means to be outdoors, and with GORUCK, we've been working with our communities and our friends over the last decade to kind of bring that conversation back about what it means to be a community and to spend more time with each other outside.
And as I'm sure you've probably caught on by now, if you didn't already know, a large portion of this podcast and a large reason it exists is just that concept of getting people back in nature, because one, I think it's beneficial to people, but I also think it opens up a better part of themselves. It's the world we have to exist in, so we need to be a part of it as opposed to being separate from it and maybe even scared of it. So you mentioned that you grew up in Florida, where you live now. You're in Jacksonville now, right?
Yeah.
Did you grow up in Jacksonville, or did you grow up elsewhere in Florida?
No, I grew up in Jacksonville.
So what did your experience as a child look like? Were you a child that spent a lot of time in nature, or are you a person that came to it later in life?
I spent a lot of time in nature growing up. My mom was a teacher and my dad was a mortgage loan officer. Right in middle class. The backyard was big. It seemed really big back then. So I grew up in that time that, a lot of us that are in our 40s and maybe 50s can relate to, where we built forts, we played sandlot baseball, went around the neighborhood with our friends, and the type of existence where you got home and you immediately changed your clothes and went outside. Or like in my case, a few times I didn't change my clothes and I ripped up my nice jeans and my mom got really pissed at me. So yeah, that was what it was. And of course, you live in Florida, you get good weather almost year round. I think it snowed twice in my life growing up. So we have a really short winter, lots of time on the beach, lots of national parks. So yes, I spent a lot of time outside, and it wasn't all about like, oh, we're taking this big trip, we're gearing up and we're going to do these things. It was really pretty simple living, where you just walk out your back door or sometimes your front door. We would go to the beach every weekend. I tell people now I lived over the ditch, which is kind of a big divide between the beaches and the town here in Jacksonville. Back then, going from over the ditch in town to the beach was like a 10 or 15-minute drive. Now there's more lights and more traffic, more congestion, more homes, more people. So it takes a little bit longer. It's almost like twice that, about 30 minutes. But we would go to the beach a lot, and it was simple. It was just like play in the sand, go in the water. Didn't have to bring a lot of equipment and things like that. So nothing wrong with camping and getting into the outdoors. I think that's awesome. I was listening to like your first episode, is that sometimes that can seem like a barrier, right? Like it's like feels elitist, like golf or tennis or snow skiing. It doesn't really have to be that way. And I think something that GORUCK has really opened, our eyes to, and a lot of other people's eyes, is like democratization of the outdoors. It's for everyone in a lot of different ways.
There's an interesting thing with people's access to nature. So you might know I grew up in Louisiana, and I grew up in like a low-income family. And so part of the reason we went camping is because it was affordable. Otherwise, we couldn't afford to go places, and we were often camping in the panhandle of Florida. So there's this interesting divide where to a certain degree, nature is available to higher income people, but then also to low income out of necessity. And then there's this weird world in between all of this where it's a thing that's still kind of separated from a lot of people. And I feel like some of these things have kind of developed over my lifetime. And I do think it's really important to bring people from all incomes back to it. And it's like you were saying, it's kind of the same thing with me growing up. You didn't think like, oh, we're going to go into nature this weekend, or we're going to go into the outdoors. It's just, oh, we're going to go somewhere, which means we're going to camp. And that's just going to be a natural part of it. And I do think it's important to get people back to that idea that it's not this weird special thing you do. It's just part of your life and something you do all the time. And it sounds like that was how you grew up also. Did that continue to be the case as you aged, or did you go through these phases where you kind of broke away from it and then chased career paths or whatever and then found your way back to it later? Or has it been a constant throughout your life?
I will love to answer this question. And I loved hearing that about you, because it really resonated with me. And I think it's something that needs to be explored. And I'm really glad that there's a podcast that, you're running that is asking these questions. I mean it. It's really important, because it like you said, it's like the poor, have to have access to it because this is their reality, right? And then the rich, it's like they do it in other ways that it can be inaccessible. But what about everybody in the middle, which is the most people, right? This is the majority that we're talking about. I've seen it on all levels, I think. I'll give you an example. And then I'll get back to the question about sort of over the course of my life, how has the outdoors played a part in that? But something that really just woke me up was I was posted to West Africa. It's kind of a lonely existence sometimes, you know. You're out there, and everyone's like, yay, you're there. We're never going to visit, you know. And it wasn't a garden spot for sure. I went on a lot of runs on my own at first when I first got there, and I didn't really know many people. And I would go for a run, and I'd see these African women mostly, but men as well, with, you know, heavy pots full of mangoes or pineapples or, you know, the cassava roots on their head. They were walking many miles, I mean, double-digit miles from their village to the city to sell these at like an outdoor farmer's market. And I just remember the look I would get from these people who are working so hard. And here I am, I'm just like trying to get out of the office to burn some calories. And I just felt like this is like almost a crime. Like, why would you go out and purposely just run if the lion's not chasing you or you don't have, you know, somewhere to be, right? And it really kind of made me question a lot of things. And it still does to this day, because I feel like what you're talking about, you know, you talk to someone who's coming up through poverty and they get a job that's sitting down in an office with air condition. They're excited about that. It's one of those things over time in evolution, you and I, if you put us in, you know, a box and tell us to sit here all day in the air condition, we're going to be bored and our bodies are going to feel terrible and we're going to start to feel terrible. So it really is like, where's the right balance? How do we be comfortable and safe and keep our children comfortable and safe and healthy? It's not one or the other, right? It's not walk, you know, 50 miles a day until you drop, right? Because this is your livelihood. That's not the goal. Neither is to sit in, you know, a cubicle or sit in your chair for 12 hours a day and go to the gym for 45 and then drive home and then lie down in your bed. So somewhere in the middle, we have to think about this. We have to almost course correct on what it means to be healthy and in tune with nature. And I believe that getting outside is the best solution to this problem because of that it is accessible to everyone. You can do it in so many different ways. It's like really just pick your pleasure. You can ruck, you can hike, you can run, you can walk, you can go fishing. You know, there's so many ways to connect with the outdoors and to do so in a way that's really good all around. To get back to your question, you know, I grew up this kid that spent a lot of time outdoors. That was great. This is when school still had like, you know, longer recess times. You know, let's run around the fence every day. I always loved running. So I got into track and field and then cross country later in high school and then ended up running in college. And so I went to DC at Georgetown and I felt like I knew that city. I knew every alleyway, every place you could stop to pee, you know, like, you know, and that to me, I felt so much more in tune with my body than I ever had at that time. And I was doing it in a way with a group of girls and sometimes the guys' team. And it became my social network. Georgetown didn't have Greek life. I didn't care at the time, but the track team became sort of that sisterhood. And we were bonded by the hard workouts we had to do together, you know, the elements that we had to go out in. And all that time we spent running around the city, talking with each other. And it's funny to think like we were in a city, but we were still outdoors. So you don't have to be in the mountains or in a beautiful beach, or, you know, you don't have to be in the jungle to be outside. And that's a lot of what GORUCK kind of fell into by accident. It's like, oh, this is what you got? Let's use that. Your city is still full of outdoor experiences.
Yeah, it's really a thing about being active to a certain degree more so. For instance, like I climb, and climbing is a huge thing now throughout the country, but so much of it is indoors. It's great when we can get the people that are climbing indoors to also go outdoors, but also just the fact that they're active and socializing and have found this active pursuit to socialize around is beneficial enough. But yeah, we were going to talk also about like your experience, because for me, I did kind of get away from it grew up playing in the woods. Woods surrounded my neighborhood. And then as I got older and you start getting into your teen years and all, it very much becomes about socializing, right? And finding partners and things like that. And I kind of got away from it, moved to Los Angeles, and then found my way back to it, and then found a whole new group of friends and a whole new set of pursuits in life. We're going to talk about whether that was also your experience, or if you, unlike me, were able to keep it a balanced life throughout.
College, I did a lot of running. We were running 90, 100 miles hours a week. So, and they were all outdoors. There was not an indoor track facility. So a lot of outdoor time. So after graduating, I kept running and kept staying outside, just not to that intensity. If it was pouring down rain, I'd say like, no, you know what, I'm just gonna wait till it stop, before I just have to go. Definitely made it a little bit more normalized. Shortly after I graduated, my dad passed away suddenly, and being outside was therapy, getting that stress relief and kind of dealing with all the emotions I was going through gave me that space. So I kept it up for a long time. I even coached at my high school when I moved back home for a while. After that, I ended up doing a volunteer opportunity in South America. I lived in an intentional community with 7 other Americans, so we spent a lot of time outdoors as well, just to kind of, not be on everybody's, in everyone's space all the time. So I never really took a break. It just changed. The environment changed and the way I could spend, because being in Ecuador, I couldn't run as far. It wasn't just, I did go out and venture out, and I got the group to go. It was a lot of pollution. You'd have to avoid certain areas. It wasn't like, oh, I love this run. It was just like, let's do it. But we found other ways to spend it outside, playing with kids, playing soccer, adapting to that community. And then when I came home, from that year abroad, that's when I started, looking at the next step and looking towards working at the government. I will say I had a lot of great experiences with the agency, and I really loved a lot of the training they give, but I was disappointed by the lack of time outdoors and sort of the physical testing. You see these movies, and again, I didn't grow up wanting to be James Bond. I never did, which is a whole nother story, but I ended up falling into that role somehow. And then, of course, once you're on that path, you're getting to next level, okay, you've passed this part of the process, let's move on. I started, reading more, watching more movies, and I was actually like, wow, I'm really excited to see what kind of boot camp type, skills we're going to learn. That was few and far between, and I was disappointed. I was like, we had this one, after you graduate, there's a lot of sitting down writing, it's a lot of going to dinners and eating. And, it's just like, not a lot of like, hey, let's go out and chase the bad guy or, run around, it's a lot of sitting. So that drove me crazy. Again, with some of my other friends who were in the training, we sought out ways to do, some of them taught me some Krav Maga, we would go on runs where the training was based. So we made it happen, but it was like in the, the slivers of time we had left. The best part was, you get to do this kind of cool, like spy school training once you graduate. And they did this land navigation course, and I loved it. It was my favorite part. And it's basically drop you out in the woods, give you a compass and a map, and you have to basically do like what Special Forces soldiers do in their selection course is the STAR course, where you're given 5 points, you have to go to them, given the lat long, and you have to, hike to them, see the instructor, they check you in, you go to the next one. I was just thrilled. At one point I heard that this one colleague, I won't mention who, she was so nervous about getting outside that she stopped drinking water like a few days prior.
That's
and she
a bad
passed
decision.
out in the woods. She passed out in the woods because she was afraid of having to pee in the woods. And myself, I was like, you know what, you should just be DQ'd from this training course, right? For whatever it's worth, you can still be James Bond and not have to pee in the woods.
I don't know that James Bond has ever peed in the woods in any of his movies.
He hasn't, but I'd like to think that the James Bond I want to see, maybe it's not even a man, maybe it's a woman, maybe she's going to pee in the woods, But anyway, yeah, so that was my favorite part of the whole training. I liked it, I did well, and it was fun for me. But again, I told you, you get to Africa, again, it took me a little while to find my group. Like you said, you had to find new friends. I think exploring outdoors and finding people who are being outdoors is really important. And for West Africa, what was really great for me was the Hash group. I don't know if you've heard of the Hash Hound Harriers.
No, tell us more.
I mean, it is so cool. So basically, it started somewhere in Southeast Asia. Expats, I believe they were British, probably when the Brits were taking over the world. The expats would just get together and they would call themselves the Hashhound Harriers, which was a drinking group with a running problem, was their tagline.
I've heard that, and I don't know if it was in reference to them or if somebody else is using that same slogan.
Maybe. Well, they're everywhere. It's pretty old school, right? So they haven't really updated with the times, on social media. I went to their website once and it was a little like, whoa, they were trying to figure some things out still. But the tradition is still alive and well in a lot of these far corners of the earth where expats and locals will get together. And in Africa, it meant we'd go to these like rubber tree plantations and banana plantations, a little bit outside of the city. So pollution's less, danger's less. Someone would mark a trail with some flour. There's some false trails that you can go on. And the point is to stick together and have fun and kind of lope around. And sometimes it would be 8, 10, 12 miles long, depending on how much you got lost. And then you meet at the end and drink beers. And everyone's got a nickname if you come long enough. It's really fun and a really great way to create some entertainment when you're, in a place that doesn't have a lot. And you're outdoors and you get to see a country in a whole different light. So Jason came and did some of those with me when I was posted. And I think actually indirectly it influenced sort of the GORUCK, besides the military doing similar things, which is his side of the story. The GORUCK events kind of became this thing. You do these hard things outside with people and then you drink beers afterwards. It's been really funny to see how it's grown over the years and how it's even evolved. We have ruck clubs all over the world now. Kind of think about it like a running club. We get together and put weight in our backpacks and go for a walk together. And I run my own here in town, separate from the GORUCK headquarters one, because I realized that it just wasn't fitting my lifestyle as a mom of young kids. Actually, we have 72 members, not all active, but that basically come and go. But there's a core group of us, about 20 strong. We get together most weekends and go for a ruck with our kids. It's one of those things, it doesn't cost anything. It's just show up at this park, and sometimes the kids ruck, sometimes they ride their scooters, sometimes they run, sometimes that they're really little, they ride in their strollers. It's less about a competition or tracking our miles as it is getting our kids outdoors and doing it together. It really helps when, one kid's having a hard time. They tend to just fall in line better when there's other kids. So this last Sunday, for example, it was one of our youngest members turning 2. The mom said, "Can I just do her birthday party as the ruck?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And to myself, I thought, why didn't I do something like that when my kids were little? Putting on a party for them and their little 2-year-old friends was a disaster. They're cranky as they're inside and they're giving them sugar and they're, you don't want them to destroy things, but they're going to anyway. She basically took the ruck over. It was like a little birthday takeover, and the kids had so much fun. It wasn't about the presents. It was about her riding her new scooter and, us going to get our smoothie halfway point and then rucking back and stopping in a park at the end to play. I really think at a really basic level, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get in depth about GORUCK shortly, but I think I'd be doing everyone a disservice if we didn't talk about this really quickly. You've mentioned living in South America, living in Africa, and also being in the CIA.
Right.
So I don't want to gloss past those. Let's talk about how and why you ended up living in other countries, and then after that, we definitely have to talk about what it's like being in the CIA.
Sure.
So what brought you to Africa and what brought you to South America?
You start at the beginning with these sort of things. My mom was a language teacher. She fell in love with France when she was younger, so I grew up having a lot of exchange students in our house, exposed to a lot of, things that middle-class American girl wouldn't necessarily have been exposed to. We did a lot of outdoor stuff, but we did a lot of cultural stuff, like going to museums and festivals all around the state, anything you could drive to. And like you said, even some camping and visiting family. We didn't ever go to a hotel just for the heck of it. It was like you go visit somebody, you go see their way of life. Gosh, that reminds me, I hadn't thought about this in a long time, but we went to West Virginia once to visit my aunt, my mom's sister, who was there doing a residency for medical school. That was like one of my best outdoor experiences I ever had as a kid. We were in the middle of nowhere. It was like a farm, but not in the mountains. And then I remember, it was the first time I ever shot a rifle, and it was like a Welch's grape can that I had to shoot. And then we went on this hike, and I found this deer skull, and I just thought it was the neatest thing. I found out later, only 2 years ago, that my uncle had planted that for me to find.
That's a good uncle.
But I didn't know that until then, and I just thought, I'm such an explorer. Look at me. So think about that. As parents, the little white lie in there, but it kind of set me on a trajectory of I'm an explorer. I'm not afraid to try new things. Because of that, after I graduated college, I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to live abroad. I couldn't do a study abroad experience when I was in college because of being on the track team. Just would be missing out a whole season in training. I felt like I missed out a little bit on that, but my rationalization was you can always go live abroad. You can't, run on a Division I team ever again after this. So let's just stick with this for now. At the time, it was hard because I had all these friends going to live in their spring break lives, and that would seem pretty awesome adventures and good for them. But, I made up for it, I think. I applied for a position as a volunteer with Catholic Relief Services. It was one of the best years of my life. I learned so much. It was a hard time for me. It was, right after my dad had passed away. It was right after 9/11. Just things, as a young 20-something, I just felt a little unhinged. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And that really gave me some direction and some purpose. I think it's really good to have purpose, right? Especially when you're younger and you're wondering how you contribute to society and do you even matter? Going to do something like that, serving others, even if that's a complicated sort of subject of what is service and, what does it mean to give to someone and who really benefits from all that. There are all those things that you can get philosophical on. At the end of the day, it really, as a young 20-something, it gave me a purpose in life. It let me know that the world is bigger than just me, and yet I do matter. So it was the best of both, right? Be humble, but still, you need to do things that are going to fill you up as well. South America was something I'd wanted to do. It was a great thing. My only regret is that I didn't apply to the Peace Corps because I thought 2 years at that time would be too long to defer student loans, too long to be out of the workforce. And I tell young college graduates now, it's you can have that time. Just take it.
If I could change something maybe, and I'm not a big fan on changing things, but hypothetically, if I were changing something in my past, I do wish I just would have been aware that the Peace Corps was an option, because I
Yes.
think I would have loved to have participated in that.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like you could say that about a lot of things. The Peace Corps, the volunteer program I did, the military, Teach for America. There's all these opportunities that I feel like it's almost like a best kept secret. People that know about them, they tell people about them, and it's there's not a lot of cross-pollination or something. I don't know. And I want to talk about this more for people, because I just got lucky that I was looking for something unconventional after college, and a good friend of mine on the track team, he was already unconventional. He was already on track with this, and I just said, I'm going to follow you. Let's figure out where to go. And we started this club, We Eat Investment Bankers for Breakfast Club. It was just kind of a joke, but we basically were trying to do what you're talking about, is give people exposure. What's the alternative to going working on Wall Street after you graduate, or going to join the rat race? Here are some alternatives. For example, this wonderful girl that I know who babysits my kids, she was having this, I don't know what to do after college kind of talk with me the other day. And I said, why don't you look at the Peace Corps? Why don't you look at something like that? She's applied, and she's waiting to find out next month if she's going to go. And were really excited. And I said, you know what, even if that doesn't work out, like there's other places, right? Now her mind's open to that.
I've got to imagine that the experiences you get from something like that are so much more valuable than you even could imagine from the beginning. Just what you learn about humanity, what you learn about yourself.
Yeah, it's the full package. I remember coming back from Ecuador, going to job interviews. And at this time, I hadn't applied to the government yet. I was just applying to be a teacher and, some other positions around town. I remember going to these interviews and people being fascinated. Tell me more about that experience. Like, I got all the job offers. And that's because I did something different. I wasn't just saying I worked at this retail store and now I'm going to work at this new retail store. Nothing against that. People need to do what they need to do. But what's interesting is that I didn't have money. I was a poor college kid and I basically deferred $120K in student loans and said, I'm just going to do what I need to do right now. I need to go try something fun and new. And it wasn't reckless. My family supported me. I was with a group of people. It wasn't like I was like, hey, fund me. It came with its own stipend, I came home and I had a lot of loans and that was a lot to deal with, but I got the job with the government. They had this great student loan repayment program. I will max out my payments if you match. And, before I turned 30, the student loans were gone and that was really great. And I think it's because I got lucky in a lot of ways. I'm not going to deny that. But at the same time, it was because I decided to take a gamble on myself, right?
Yeah, to a certain degree, like there's just dumb luck. But then to a certain degree, there is the concept of making your luck, right? Which if you take the right sort of chances, the likelihood of luck is better.
Exactly. Instead of like letting someone else or something else control your destiny, you control it. I could still be paying off my loans if I hadn't have found that, that job in the student loan repayment program. But I often think that because I deferred those loans and had those experiences, that's what made me a more attractive candidate.
And I think that's probably very likely.
Someone who's willing to do that. Again, yeah, so that was exciting. I was a little apprehensive to join the government. I'd just been doing like social work in Latin America. I taught a PE class to about 300 Ecuadorian children at this communist school it's called Oswaldo Guayasamín, which is a famous communist artist in Ecuador. A lot of anti-CIA propaganda in that country from that artist. So I felt a little weird about that sometimes, but at the same time, so it was myself and my best friend down there, Mary. We would go to the school with, it was just crazy. It was just a rundown school, no air conditioned, open aired, just like what you would imagine, just dirt floors. And they wanted us to teach them PE. The first few weeks, it was a disaster because we didn't know much Spanish. They didn't respect us. It was just a free-for-all. I remember taking a 2x4 out of some kid's hand,
oh, wow.
All these things. But at the end of the year, and this is something just to be said for like keeping at it, not giving up, is that, we had hard days and it was outside in the heat, wearing these uniforms. We had to wear long pants and, cotton shirts. And we would just come back every day and say, how can we do this better? And by the end, it was amazing. The transformation, we had these whistles and we had them in lines. We basically ran like a boot camp. We had those little kids doing push-ups and playing Red Rover and had to give it some time. But we basically brought a lot of American style PE games and fun things to their school, which was, lacking in some discipline and order just from lack of resources, right? Not from, anything the teachers weren't doing. They were just trying to do their best. It was a really great experience to see that. And, we passed along the torch to the next volunteers that came. And eventually, the goal is that you find a local that wants to take the reins and get paid for that as a job. So that was kind of the goal of that program, was to always do what you can while you're there and then hopefully create something sustainable for when you leave.
I just want to point out, you mentioned Red Rover, and I just think Red Rover is an underappreciated game, and I'm glad that you could bring it to other countries so that they can appreciate Red Rover, because I think more people need to appreciate Red Rover.
I don't think it's allowed in many schools these days.
I've wondered if that is the case, because there's a bit of violence to it. much like dodgeball, but that's also partly why I think I liked them so much as a kid.
There's a lot of justice to them too, though. Have you ever seen that? I don't know if it's a meme or some Twitter quote. Don't you wish those days when you could just play Red Rover and clothesline that kid that was making everybody mad? You know what I mean, though? It's like the community would fix things, right? If you let kids, and I'm on this like deep dive on parenting right now because of my 3-year-old. He's been diagnosed as sensory seeking, which basically means he needs to be outside all the time, which is great for us because we like that. But the funny thing about parenting, it's like a Jedi mind trick. It's like the less you do, the better it is. And I think that goes for teachers and mentors. It's like, you need to be there. You need to guide. The kids want to play Red Rover, you probably should let them. You know?
Who doesn't want to play Red Rover?
The Ecuadorian kids loved it. They begged us to play it. It was no less violent there than it was when we were growing up. You would see the smaller kids that were a little weaker, that they would break the chain for them. But the kids that kind of needed to be taken out or fall to the ground a little bit, everyone would just, double up and try to make sure they wouldn't break it. It's a really interesting, game when you think about it from a societal perspective.
There's this weird social aspect to it outside of just people running into each other's arms to try to break their arms apart.
There's a lot more to it.
So one of the things I want to shift to now is the CIA. So like you were saying, it's not like being James Bond. So tell people what you did for the CIA and what your life was sincerely like while you did that.
I'm not going to say it's not any of it is like James Bond, but but the physical part, I do think there are parts of that business that do a lot of kinetic and physical things, and good for them. Not coming from a military background, being a smaller woman, I was, not necessarily put in that category, but I wanted to be. I wanted there to be like a fitness test involved, and I think there used to be one. Over the years, they take things out for whatever reason, but I was the accidental case officer of sorts. I ended up applying to be a language teacher because I French major, and then I just spent this time in Ecuador and had gained some fluency, and I thought, well, my language skills will be helpful. That'd be cool. There's a lot of different jobs in the CIA. I didn't know which one I was going to be, but post 9/11, there was a big push for people, and I always laughed because the strategic languages were none of the ones that I had. Arabic, Chinese, Russian, Farsi, Urdu, and here I am coming in with my French and Spanish. I felt a little like, oh man, I'm not very cool when I first came in, but you gotta have to just be you, right? And the good thing about me was that I had years of French and now Spanish, and I could test out of them, and I got a bonus, which was nice. went to that student loans debt I had. So at the time they had where you could test and earn a language bonus, probably still do to a certain extent today. Because of that, I was able, once we graduated from our training, I was able to go out into the field immediately, which was awesome. I was like one of the first people in my class to be given an assignment. It was really cool. It was like, go find these Sudanese rebels and ask them why they left the Darfur peace agreement. And I was like, wow, this is legit. So that was my first sort of assignment. It was awesome. Something that I really liked about it is that I did a lot of research beforehand, but I talked to a lot of people in the building that had been to those places, even people that were kind of outside of the group that I was in, the Directorate of Operations. So I would talk to basically the analyst. Like most government things, there's a lot of well, that's them and this is us. Even post 9/11, when there's a lot of talk about connecting dots, it's easier said than done. But I took it very literally. I'm like, I'm going to go connect that dot. So I talked to people and they gave me lots of great information, and basically, you go and you talk to people and you get them to trust you. It's a lot of relationship building. It's about being able to assess people and read them and then accurately transmit that. Do it over and over again. Keep pushing it forward. That was a really cool first assignment for a young 20-something. Something I do say to a lot of people about working in the government, it's you receive a lot of responsibility early on. You're kind of operating alone. You're given a lot of responsibility, a lot of trust. It's a cool job from that perspective. And I loved the work that I did in Africa. I think, Africa is someplace I really want to go back to one day. not to just explore more of the the beautiful scenery there, but the work that can be done and the people, it's a real depth to it. You don't even realize until you're in it. And you're like, wow, I could keep working on this problem for the rest of my life. It's just, there's so many different facets to it. So I miss that. Did I answer your question about day in a life or what you do? I mean, I was a political officer, and so I did a lot of, political kind of work on the ground in a lot of countries there. I'm assessing kind of the internal situation. When I was in Cote d'Ivoire, I helped with the election and identification process. I mean, we're talking about people that just don't have papers. Large groups of people that are marginalized and not recognized by their own governments. Finding out ways to work with NGOs and other, the existing government and other people on the ground there. What I was saying is so cool about Africa is just everybody's there. All the big players, all the big NGOs. There's just a lot to be done, and you can do it in a way that your hands aren't really tied because it is where it is. You can you're free to move around more and talk. There's not a lot of hierarchy, it's not like, oh, you can't talk to that person because they're way up, they're inaccessible. No, you have access.
I bet that your experiences in Africa and South America before you worked for the CIA were particularly helpful for then your career later on. And I doubt that when you went over there, you thought, oh, I'm going to go to these other countries and volunteer to a certain degree, and this is somehow going to be really helpful to work for the CIA later.
I had no idea. No, I had no idea. In fact, it was like almost an about face of sorts. A lot of people who end up starting down the path of volunteering. And basically what I was doing was social work. I ran an after-school program. I taught English to women, ran PE programs, all this sort of stuff, living in this kind of marginalized community. I had no idea that it would be useful later on, but in the interview process for the agency, it came up a lot. Kind of like I said for the job interviews, post-ed, like people were really interested. Well, tell me what you did. How did you get to know these people? How did you get access to their homes? Tell me about these reports you wrote. This friend of mine, he kind of paved the way in some ways, but when we were handing off, he said, when you get to know one of the kids in our after school program, try to go follow them home and just get to know a little bit more about their life. I did this with like 80 kids. I keep like a file on them because kind of how I would handle them in the after school program depended a lot about what I observed in their homes. Were they living 10 people to a home? Did they not get enough to eat there? Should I make sure they get double the ration of this colada mix we made with lots of vitamins, and we'd hand out bananas every day. And sometimes, you'd be like, no, only one banana per kid. But, then that this kid's not going to get anything when they get home. You manage to find another way to give them one. And, it's not about being fair. It's about not everybody starting from the same playing field. So that kind of information and kind of looking behind the scenes it really translated in a way that I didn't expect it to overseas, and something that I did not because it was part of my job, but because it was something I wanted to do as a person. And it also connected me with some of my State Department colleagues, was that I would go to an orphanage almost on a weekly basis in Africa. And we would just play with the kids there or hold the babies or, go to this place that was hard and it was difficult to go to. But you don't do it because you want people to, respect you. You do it because you want to do the right thing. But in the end, it opens people's hearts and minds to you later on. If you come to them and say, hey, I have a question. Can you tell me more about this? They look at you in a different light. She's the woman that goes to the orphanage every weekend, right? I mean, it's not, again, it wasn't like a badge. And I didn't do it from a manipulative standpoint. I had a background in doing this already. I wanted to kind of continue to do that. But it does tell people who you are. And it does, allow them to trust you.
Mm-hmm. Tell us how these life experiences eventually lead into GORUCK. But before that, go ahead and explain to people what GORUCK is and what specifically rucking is, because some people aren't familiar with that term.
Right. I'm glad you stopped me on that because we live and breathe it all the time. So we're like, oh, whoa, sorry. People are like, ruck what? Are you calling me a name? Funny story. We have these Rucket shirts, and I wore it into my kid's school the other day, and the woman at the front desk was giving me a weird look. And she was like, I could not wear that shirt. And I was like, what do you mean? It's just ruck it. And I was like, oh, I never thought about it from that standpoint. So thanks for asking me to explain. So rucking is something that I learned through Jason because he was in the Special Forces qualification course and he was rucking a lot. So it's basically putting weight in backpack and moving with it. And this is just at the foundation of like Green Beret training. This is what they do more than anything. And that he got really good at it. He would run with me a lot. He would, end up coming to the running camps I do in the Appalachian Mountains with some of the girls I coached and tag along when we were together. Running wasn't really his favorite. So when he got to there, he rucked and he actually did really well in that area. So something that I learned through him, but I wasn't quite into it then. I did it a little bit with him, but it was more just still like hiking to me. So that's what rucking is. GORUCK actually is, at its basic level, it's taking what Jason learned in the military and bringing it to a wider audience. The only people who knew about rucking were people in the military. And then, it's also a rugby term, but that I don't even know what that means. But what GORUCK did is it basically started making rucking a thing where you didn't have to be in the military to do it. You didn't have to do it with the weight that the military does it. I mean, the military likes to make everything miserable.
Yeah.
If you can turn a scuba diving trip in Key West into misery, then nothing's fun in the military. Skydiving, terrible in the military, I hear. So rucking in the military is usually like something like 80, 90, with all your uniform on and you're carrying your weapon, your ammo, and your batteries for the comms equipment, whatever, food, rations. It can get more than 100 pounds and then you got to jump out of an airplane. That's not fun. So you hear a lot of vets say, I won't ever ruck again. It ruined my back. It did all this. So we have to kind of start them over again and say, no. This is like fun. This is 20 pounds. This is 30 pounds if you're, a bigger person. And you're just walking around with it. Jason's really gotten into the science behind it and talked to a ton of experts on why this is good for your body, why this is a good fitness activity, burns 3 times the calories as walking. It can helps you have good posture. It gives you an alternative to something like running where there's a lot of strike force on your joints. And frankly, there's just a lot of people out there, not me, but there's a lot of people that have always hated running. And I find that the older I get, I can't find my group of, girls to go running with, It's this, if I did, it's like the cross-country team that's across town that I just don't have time, between my 3 kids and a job. I had to make, a choice. So I could have started a run club, I guess, but, being part of GORUCK, I said, you know what, I'm going to start a ruck club because every time I ask someone to go for a run with me, they say no, within my neighborhood. But when I ask them to go for a ruck with me, they say yes. And then they feel like they can bring their kids or their dog, or it's different. It's surprising to me. As a runner, it hurts a little, Even for me now that I don't run as much, it's a lot easier to just pick up that ruck and go for a few miles on the beach, on the roads or whatever, and get that workout in and be outside. I can do it while on a work call. I can listen to a podcast. When I run, I don't like anything. I don't like to listen to anything. It's just I've been conditioned over the years of running by myself and even running in a group, wanting to have conversation, or, running in wooded areas where it's just unsafe to block out the senses. I could talk for a long time about this because I think it's really important as anyone, but especially as a female runner, to be careful about these kind of things. But with rucking, again, I would take them out if I were going in an isolated area, but I'm usually on the roads or the beach and I'm not moving. I'm a little bit more aware of my senses, and it's just a different, you're not kind of getting into that zone of running where you're thinking about things and just tuning out a little bit. With rucking, I can do other things. Look, your profile's different too. I've got this backpack on. I even have my mace if I need it. I'm not gonna get picked on that way. When you're running around as a girl, you got your headphones in, you go down secluded area, it's bad news, right? You've heard the stories. I mean, I'm not fear mongering. I've definitely run in a lot of areas where I'm like, I need to get out of here quickly. So I believe it's worth the risk, but I encourage people to really take out those earbuds, and unless you're running on the streets and there's lots of people around, but you got to be really careful. So GORUCK has been something that we've been doing for the last decade plus. Like I said at the beginning, we came up with this idea when I was in West Africa, kind of thinking about what Jason was going to do next to kind of follow my career. That didn't work out exactly the way we planned it, but GORUCK has lived on. Over the years, we've done more types of rucking events, like a 5K rucking event to a 48-hour super intense endurance event, and everything in between. The commonality is all about, there's always a backpack with weight involved to make it all about rucking. But the lessons that he and I learned, in our 20s and 30s, we continue to apply them, and we continue to learn through the other people that we meet along the way for GORUCK and other people that are doing great things. And we think it's really important to get outside and do real things with real people.
So how do people get involved with GORUCK? Because I know it's beyond just the Jacksonville area. So if someone was listening and they're like, oh, this sounds interesting to me, I want to check it out, how would they do that?
We have a great website. At GORUCK.com, you'll see that there's a lot of ways to get involved. Find a ruck club. Just put in your zip code and find if there's a ruck club near you, and just show up. You don't even have to have a special backpack. You can just bring whatever you have, and seen people show up with, water bottles as weight, sacks of flour, anything. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You'd make do. It's not a barrier to entry. So there's finding a ruck club. We even have people that get really, energized and say, there's no ruck club around me. I want to start one. So, that's another thing you can do. But there's also events that are led by our cadre, which are special operations combat veterans. People like Jason, they come back and they kind of basically give you an experience that's team building in nature, where you often are going through an urban environment and they're making you do, some rucking exercises and team building sort of exercises and PT along the way, and some movements. It's really cool because it's like you get a very intimate tour of the city, especially if you do the overnight one, like 2 a.m. That was the signature one. There's a lot of ways to do this. So we even you can ruck certain road races now. Instead of just, running or walking, you can ruck it. We recently did a local race here. It was a half marathon. The GORUCK headquarters did it, raise awareness and fundraise for one of our employees' wives who was just recently diagnosed with breast cancer, because it was a breast cancer themed race. You can see their community is really active. We have a lot of people that are former and current service members, spouses, kids who kind of grew up wondering what it was like to kind of be in the military. And so you get sort of a feel for it that way. There's also a lot of police officers and firefighters and all sorts of EMTs. I mean, we really have a wide following of folks that are community helpers and teachers as well. What I love about our events and our community is that it's kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning. It's really one of the few places you can go to today and have it really be kind of a cross section of society. You're really getting intimate and personal, getting time with people that you may not normally interact with. And you're really getting to know that person behind the Facebook profile. And I think there's something to that. And I think that's a lot of what when you're encouraging people to get outdoors, it's like it's connecting with something real and not something that is just a sliver of reality.
Yeah, something that comes up on this show fairly frequently and in my life has been true also, is the relationships you build with people doing these sorts of activities is very different and to a certain degree deeper and stronger than the relationships you build with people in a lot of other sorts of non-active activities that you participate in life, because so much of your other interactions are not necessarily superficial, but they have a different goal. There's like a lot of those interactions have a purpose outside of the relationship, and to a certain degree, like outdoor activities, rucking, these sorts of things do as well, but they get you to work together in a way, they get you to encourage each other in a way. And I just find that the relationships people build are more meaningful in a lot of ways. Do you find that has been true for a GORUCK? And then what is the feedback that you're getting from members and people that come and join?
Oh, absolutely. especially, with our signature events where you're spending 6, 10, 12, 48, 24 hours with people. People tell me I do these events, one, to become a better leader for myself, to find out where my weaknesses are. Also, a huge point is what you just spoke about, is that I've met so many people that I wouldn't necessarily have come across in my life. And I found out that I have a lot in common with them, even if on the surface it doesn't seem as such. The bond that you create, we're creating this bond, this crucible moment, right? It's not real. We're not really at war. We're not really like going through a hurricane disaster scenario, but we're finding out what we're made of when we practice it. I just like to relate this back to parenting. It's like, what's the purpose of parenting? It's to expose your kids to a lot in a kind of safe place, like a laboratory. So when they get tested in real life, they can fall back on that. And this is what the military does. This is even what, my training did. It's like you have to put yourself through these hard moments and see, where am I breaking down? Or where do I excel? And when do I need to ask for help? And this is, if you and I were doing an event overnight, we would basically find out like, wow, Emily, you can't lift very heavy stuff, but you can go a long ways and you have a really great attitude that keeps everyone's spirits up. When I know that I couldn't carry it any longer, I could count on you. Now you and I have an appreciation for each other that is beyond just the niceties or the courtesies of life, and social media can be a tool to continue to enhance those and to stay in touch and all those positive things we talk about it. But it can't replace, like you said, this person in front of me I can see how beat down and tired they are, but they're willing to help me right now. And I'm not going to forget
what
that.
What you're speaking to is kind of how a lot of times what happens when people kind of open themselves up to something like this is they learn their strengths and other people's strengths, but they also learn that their weaknesses are okay and that other people are willing to help them with their weaknesses, where I think we as a society try to hide our weaknesses because we fear that people will dislike us for them, that we'll feel bad about ourselves. And what we end up learning is, no, those weaknesses are okay. Maybe instead of being mocked for them, people are going to help us deal with them and maybe even try to turn those weaknesses into a strength.
Who has it all figured out? Who can do everything, right? Who can lift heavy and have endurance and have a great attitude? And nobody's like this. That's why the fabric of society works, is because we depend on everyone to come to the table with their different skill set. When I'm with my kids and one of them is just acting out and there's nothing I can do to make them happy, but that other friend or that mom, they can come in and they can fill that void for them. They can make them laugh. They can, make them feel better. They can give them a hug that comforts them. We don't change that much, We're still beings that it's not a one size fits all. Even in relationships, it's like sometimes, I need to just go talk to a girlfriend that's going to understand my point of view, make me feel better about that sort of thing, And it's like this in every aspect of what we do. We really need to connect with people in a real way that fills those voids, and not to feel inadequate because we aren't able to fill those ourselves. We're not supposed to be able to do that. We're supposed to be able to do what we do really well. Get by on the things that we don't do well, but to ask for help. I've been reading this really interesting article. It's by David Brooks about how the nuclear family is basically a failure. It survived in a very short span of time, and it was almost artificial, like it was almost propped up. Years of humans being together has always been an extended family sort of style. It's not great for personal freedom. It's not great for privacy, but it's really great if, you're not getting along with your dad, but you have this other father figure who you can relate to. And when you're going through your teen years or something like that, or, you're having a bad day, but this person can help you out because they are really good in math. And they can kind of help you see, and they're not going to make you feel inadequate, and you're not just going to hide your inadequacies and continue to go down a hole. Not to get too far off the track, but I get really annoyed with sometimes privacy talks to a certain level. I'm not being fanatical here, but on some level, I think we have to be able to, this is a larger discussion, but we talk about trying to keep our lives so private that we're not going to reach out. You don't see these in these other countries. You know, this idea that you get old and you just go to a nursing home and that's just the way it is. That doesn't happen in a lot of other countries. Why? Because one, it's not financially sustainable. And two, they're like, no, you stay with us and now we take care of you. You took care of us when we were a baby, you know, sort of thing. So I think there's a lot to be said about having your extended family not even be blood related, you know, and finding these support networks within your neighbors. If I need something, I want to be able to know my neighbors' names and go to them and say, I really need your help, right? We find this where we live when there's hurricanes. People get out in the street. They talk to each other, they loan equipment, they swap numbers, they share plans. There's this community thing that's really, the disaster's not fun, you know, but that part is really kind of beautiful. And I think you miss it if you're staying in your own lane all the time.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things about communities, and you've spoken to it as well, is just getting to know other people, getting to know people that are different from you, getting to see how people are really inherently alike when it comes down to it, and then just learning to appreciate each other and work together, and how that's more valuable than trying to be a hermit or trying to keep yourself separate from everything else and just assuming the worst about others.
Yeah.
So what I think would be great to do now, because I'm sure somebody listening is interested in GORUCK. So let's tell them where they go online to find out more about GORUCK, but also if you want to share any of your personal blog or Instagram or anything like that, and people wanted to keep up with you, how they would do that also.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity and to be on here and talk with you. It's, you know, even though it's through our computer, it's still nice to have a conversation, you know, with someone. So GORUCK is GORUCK.com. And we have like a really rich and there's going to be a lot more content coming out on our news blog there. And we do all sorts of things. It's community oriented. It's about rucking. It's, you know, I did one about my son, and they're all kind of relate to rucking somehow, but there's just a lot of really great stories on there. And you know, trips, you know, kind of something we didn't really talk about too much, but something that Jason and I always try to do when we go on a trip, we always try to create like some sort of physical crucible in it. So it's like we have something to look forward to and train for, and then we're outside, you know, hiking some trail or, you know, a mountain. And it's just really great because you get to experience that. And then after you've done it, you get to kind of relish the victory of getting that done and the accomplishment. So that's something that we write about, and, you know, kind of how to pack for those trips as well. You'll see a lot of me on the blog, but I also, you know, in addition to the GORUCK kind of Instagram account, I have my own. It's Evidently. You can follow me there. It's a lot of GORUCK stuff, but also a lot of my family as well.
All right. And the way that I always like to end the show is to ask if there's a final thought you want to leave the audience with based on the things we talked about today.
I really think it's important to kind of keep seeking. Do more of what you love, and it will lead you into a place where you can meet new people, get new ideas. And I mean, I'm an ideal collector at heart. I see something and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. That's a great idea. Like with this ruck we went on that was a birthday party, I've got this thing in my head about like more birthday rucks. Like what I said before, it's really about making those real connections and doing them outside in a way that really grounds us. There is no substitute, really, you know? I mean, if you need to go outside on your own, that's what you've got to do. But if you can do it with your dog or your friend or significant other, your kid, makes it even that much more special.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave people with. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be on here.
As a solution to help keep people active after the COVID-19 outbreak, GORUCK has made their Star Course hit list public online, and there's an option for you to create your own rucking route closer to home. So there are over 500 hit lists that currently exist in U.S. cities and beyond. And if you are interested in participating in one of those hit lists, you can find the link at our website, GoGetOutside.com, or you can look for this episode 102 with Emily McCarthy. You're going to find photographs of her in action, a link to that hit list that I mentioned, and a link to the other things that we talked about in today's show. And should you want to get in touch with us at this show, you can do that a number of ways. You can send us an email, go@butcherbirdstudios.com, or you can leave us a voice message or send us a text at 818-925-0106. And typically, I ask you all to go to your podcast purveyor of choice and subscribe, rate, and review the show and share it and all of that. And I do still hope that you will do that. But what I really want to implore you to do now is just stop and care about other people and try to become a solution to the problems of the world and not someone who further feeds them. That's my request to everybody after this episode. This episode of the Go Get Outside podcast was produced, recorded, and edited by me, your host, Jason Milligan. Additional help was provided by Griffin Davis, and as always, it has been brought to you by Butcher Bird Studios. Next time on the show, come back June 16th for Sean Camp. He is a thru hiker, and we are going to have our most in-depth discussions yet that we've had on this podcast about doing long-distance trails like the AT and the CDT. Take care of each other out there and come back in 2 weeks for Sean Camp. See you then.